На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. This week we're casting an eye over Russia's 3-1 win over Malta in their opening World Cup 2022 qualifying match, the UEFA Euro Under-21 group stage campaign which has just started today, and a managerial change in the RPL. I'm James Nichols, your host as always, and we've got the usual suspects back again, and joining me is David.
Evening, James. Evening, Richard.
And Richard.
Good evening, James. Good evening, David. How are we all?
I don't think David's good. It sounded like he perhaps fell off his chair there when he first came in.
I just realised did my chair? I didn't even notice that. I think it's because I span around on my little creaky work chair that I'm on. But then I thought, oh shit, I spoiled the fact that Richard's on.
Getting too excited about Russia from last night. And now, of course, Russia did open up their World Cup qualifying campaign last night with a 3-1 victory over Malta. Richard, you watched the game. What did you think of Russia? Was it a decent performance or as expected against the group's minnows?
No, I'd actually say it was quite a concerning performance. I mean, look, result-wise, yes. Russia went away from home in Europe in qualification and got the job done. They got the 3 points. They got the result. However, it was not a good performance. I saw a stat early on the internet where I actually thought that I think it was pretty even for shots at goal between Malta and Russia, and that's a bit of a concerning thing. The result was good, but performance scratchy, I would say. First 15 minutes of the game, I thought, you can accept a bit of sloppiness in the first 15 minutes of a game. It's when people are a bit tight, a bit nervous early doors, but then about between the 15th minute and the 45th minute of the first and the 45th minute of the first half, I thought Russia, suddenly then took control of it. They got their 2 goals. Dzyuba scored. I forgot who scored the second. I have forgotten who scored the second goal, but I know Dzyuba scored the first. There was some nice link-up play with that one. And then, you thought when they got the second goal, got in front, got 2-0 up at half time, went in for half time break in the second half. You thought, right, that's going to relax them a bit now. Going to start playing, a bit more freedom in the second half, get a few more goals. But the second half was really flat. There was a lot of sloppy passing in midfield, and just I don't know why. When they got 2-0 up in the game, suddenly then. It all got really sloppy, and Ionov then played a sloppy back pass back to Karavayev, which is intercepted by the Malta player. Then Malta scored, and then up until about the 80th minute of the game, after Malta got their goal back, Russia then were a bit sloppy. In the last 10 minutes, maybe Malta tied a little bit, and Russia eventually did step it up a bit further after that, and they got the third goal. It was not the best goalkeeper for the Malta goalkeeper for the third. It's 3 points. It's a job done, but we'll definitely have to be a lot better than that, because obviously the 2 teams that they're playing next up in Slovenia and Slovakia are definitely of a much higher caliber than Malta, with much better players. So they're going to have to step it up. Hopefully, the playing against a better quality opponent will focus Russia more, so that the performance level naturally goes up. It was a good night for Russia ultimately in the end. Cyprus drew with Slovakia. I was expecting Slovakia to beat Cyprus, and also Slovenia beat Croatia. I guess that's a good thing in a way, because Croatia are a rival for qualification. But then again, quite concerning, because Slovenia have obviously showed that they're a decent side, and Russia played them at the weekend. So hopefully there'll be a step up in quality come the Slovenia and Slovakia games, because there were certain elements of that performance last night were a bit sloppy.
Yeah, and there absolutely needs to be a step up in quality. It needs to be remembered that Malta is it's a side consisted of largely semi-professional players and players who are based domestically out of one of the lowest ranked leagues in the entirety of UEFA, in the Maltese Premier League. I think one of very few non-Maltese players actually in their squad last night was a player who plays for Newport County in the English 4th tier. So I agree. I was a little bit concerned about some aspects of the performance, but I suppose in the end they got the job done. All that was important was was the victory at the end. During which, actually, a certain Artyom Dzyuba did score for Russia, and that now takes him to the second highest goal scorer ever for the Russian national team on 27 goals. He leapfrogged Vladimir Bestachnik last night. David, we covered this last week, and obviously you weren't here for last week's podcast, but what were your thoughts about this squad in general by Stani? I mean, when we see the team last night, there was a few debutants in the squad, but none of them got on the pitch, and he tended to go with his favoured selection as usual. So what were your thoughts on the general selection and then the team for last night as well?
I'm willing to give him some slack for this selection, just purely because the under-21s is going on at the same time. As we've detailed in the past, the priority from the RFU is clearly to let this generation play the whole way through. Obviously, they are playing a year behind because of COVID. So these guys, the 23-year-olds like Lesovoy, Makarov, Chalov, Oblyakov, etc., they're all in there. So I'm willing to give him some slack for guys like Ionov being called up still and starting still, just because at the moment his selection is quite limited. A lot of the players who you're probably leaning to be calling up are off for the under-21s, doing their thing over there. But no, it was good to see Fomin. Fomin had a good first half. Akhmetov starting as well, who didn't have a great game, to be honest. He had quite a poor game. But we saw Sobolev come off the bench. Zhumalakdinov came on after some decent form for Lokomotiv, and that was his first cap for Russia off the bench there. I don't think we would really have expected too much. The only thing I was slightly disappointed was that, against this weak opposition, we didn't see maybe Dupin start. You think it's unlikely that Dupin will play against any of the next two teams. And Samoshnikov wasn't even on the bench, which is a shame to see. Karavayev playing at left back, which he's done before for Russia. And he had a good game out there. So I'm willing to give him some slack on the squad and the selection. First half was solid. They played decent in the first half, and that was really enough to make it job done. Second half was very flat. They sat off. I wouldn't say necessarily controlled the game, but Russia didn't control the game either. It was just a game. It was just a sloppy game, and Russia could have had a couple of goals based off terrible goal kicks, which Malta had, and they actually did obviously score from a terrible goal kick eventually. It was a game which was won in the first half. Malta scored with a shot which was possibly savable and a goal which is definitely preventable. They didn't just have one shot; they had multiple shots, but none were I wouldn't have said none were really big chances. The goal they did score wasn't even a big chance. It was just a well-taken strike, too powerful for Shunin to save. So yeah, it wasn't not necessarily uplifting performance, but it was enough to get the job done. But yeah, you would worry maybe going into some of these other fixtures. But hopefully later in the qualifying selection, we'll see a bit of variety in the squads once the Euros is finished for the under-21s, which obviously finishes at some point in the summer, assuming Russia get out of their group and get to that point. So yeah, just get these first three out of the way, and I think we'll see a bit more variety in the squads as it goes on.
Yeah, and you did mention it, David, and the European under-21s takes place right now. So we'll move on to the European under-21s, and next week we're going to cover the remaining two of the first team's fixtures in the current spate of the international break. And Russia have actually just defeated Iceland under-21s in the opening match of that championship. And they won 4-1 in quite a comprehensive and very impressive victory and performance as well. Now, as a quick aside, first I will explain the European under-21s, what it is and why it's taking place both now and in the summer. Now, it is, as you would expect, the regular UEFA European Championships for players who were only born on or after the 1st of January 1998 to be eligible. The group stages take place now, during this international break in March, and the knockout stages then in May, in the summer, and the end of May and start of June. Now, it was all supposed to take place then, but obviously because of the delaying of the senior European Championship, it did have to be moved like this. And I think it's quite a clever little way of both fitting it into a period of when it's not going to affect club game too much, and also bring some limelight and some attraction to the matches as the under-21s game actually does deserve, because some of the games are of very high quality, and particularly Russia's standard of play today. Now, Russia themselves are in a group with Iceland, France, and Denmark's unders. And as things stand, all of the games are still being played behind closed doors in Hungary and Slovenia, where the host as the host nations. Among the Russia squad are actually 3 players who were uncapped at this level before the tournament: Adamov, Chukavin, and a certain Arsene Zakharyan, who we'll hear, I'm sure, a lot more about in 5 to 10 minutes' time. Now, Chukavin wasn't in the initial squad, but he did replace Konstantin Kachayev, who had to drop out. The squad is, as you would expect, big names include Maximenko in goal at Spartak, Igor Dveev, Roman Yevgeniev, Pavel Maslov, Daniil Klugovoy, Nair Teknizian, Daniil Glebov, Daniil Kulikov and Lisovoy, Alexander Lomovitsky, Oblyakov, Sharpie, Nailomyarov, Utkin, Zakharyan, Chalov, Gruliov, Makarov, and Chukavin. So quickly run through them there. Now, David, you've just literally hot off the press came along with, all of us had watched the game, but I think you seem pretty enthused by that result and performance, the 4-1 win over Iceland.
Yeah, we were talking in our chat before the game about, it was an important one. Of the 3 fixtures that Russia have got, France, Denmark, and Iceland, this is the one they really needed to get off with a win. With Denmark and France being arguably, the harder fixtures. So Russia needed to get off with a good start, and obviously we'd seen them qualify well. They scored a lot and only conceded 4 goals in all of qualification, which is a solid record. And the opening exchanges, I wasn't sure where the game was going to go. Iceland were keeping the game even. Both teams were getting forward. Both teams were having shots. Well, that's a lie. Both teams were getting forward. Russia were having shots. Iceland were just threatening, but never could get anything to stick. But yeah, Russia eventually did win a penalty. Could play down the right from Makarov and Zakharyan, who won the penalty, got tripped as he chopped inside. And once that was tucked away, Russia really then stepped up. Iceland, obviously, it seemed like they were instructed to maybe sit off for a bit. The second goal came out from actually some intense pressing from Iceland. About 10 minutes later, they were pressing Russia really deep in their defence, and I was worried that they were going to get caught out. But they played it so well to get out of defence. Some really nice one-touch stuff, which ended up with Teknizian making a bursting run forward. Played a 1-2 with Chalov, carried on his run, dinked it over the keeper. Very, very nice goal. And then Zakharyan again then bagged the third goal with, again, more interplay with Chalov. And then a little mazy solo run, which he then nicked it past the keeper right on the stroke of half time. So that was a great first half. Going at 3-0, you're feeling confident for the second half. They got the fourth relatively early on. Makarov scoring another Makarov special. A little run with some chops and some skills and a classic powerful finish. And then Russia started making subs, and the game was won at that point. Russia made all their subs over the next sort of 20 minutes or so. Resting players like Chalov, Makarov, they came off. Iceland got a goal back from one of their only shots on target in the entire game. And they played it out well. Could have maybe scored again, but game was won. Big important victory, and now we just wait and see how France do in their game later against Denmark, and they can go into the next ones with some confidence. It should be a real confidence boost for the boys. Going into the next game.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at some of the statistics from the game as well, and the one name that really points out is Fyodor Chalov. Got his goal early on through the penalty, and then 3 assists. He was involved in everything in the game. He had an excellent performance. But one I'd like to really highlight is Arsene Zakharyan. He only made his debut against Tambov towards the end of the first half of the season. He was named in the the Guardian's next generation of the biggest upcoming talents in European football. And since then, and since the winter break, he's started every single game for Dinamo. He's now started the first game for the under-21s back. Dinamo have won all of these games apart from the derby match against Spartak. And ironically, that's the only game that they haven't won in which Zakharyan wasn't directly involved in the goal. If I remember correctly, that's he's played in. He scored against Akhmat, got an assist against Tambov, scored an assist against Krasnodar, and now scored against Iceland in the 21s, as well as winning the opening penalty as well with a nice mazy little run. He's been absolute revelation. And Richard, discussing Zakharyan and that revelation, there's actually quite a few young Dinamo players in this squad. It does really suggest that the future is bright for Dinamo, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, James. I think that there's also Yevgeniev at the back. Guryov came off the bench today, second half substitute. Chukavin too was another second half substitute. So yeah, I think the future's quite bright for Dinamo, and it's brilliant to see, as we mentioned on last week's pod. It's really refreshing to see a coach in Sandro Schwartz from abroad come in and show faith in these young players. Give them the minutes. Stick by them, put an arm around them when they suffer that loss against Spartak, and keep playing them. In the past we've had situations where maybe a young player's been thrown in, and then a manager has taken them out after a defeat. But no, I'm really liking what Schwartz is doing. He's showing faith in these young players of Dinamo. And Zakharyan, what a rise! I mean, yeah, to go from your debut to 4 or 5 months later playing in a major international youth tournament for your country, it's absolutely fantastic. And the great thing about Zakharyan is he's actually eligible for the next 2 editions of the under-21s, which is absolutely brilliant. And you suspect maybe for the next cycle he will be dipped in and out of the senior team to the under-21s team. You really, he could probably, if Russia qualify for the next tournament after this, he could feature in that too, and they could put him in the 21s and the senior team, manages minutes between the two. So yeah, I think Dinamo potentially have a very bright future, and it's fantastic seeing these young academy products get some games. And I saw bits of the second half, and yeah, very, very promising. And it's a good win today, and hopefully they can be good and competitive against France in the next game.
Yeah, absolutely. And moving on to that, I will quickly want to mention France, is that they are, of course, the tournament favourites. They are one of or probably by quite some distance, to be honest, the strongest side in the tournament. Going through the squad, I mean, names like Melier, Badashile, Wesley Fofana, Jules Koundé, Matteo Guendouzi, Eduardo Camavinga, Odson Edouard. The list goes on and on. So, Richard, straight back to you. What are your expectations for this? Do you think they could qualify for the knockout stages that take place in May?
Well, this result today helps them. They had to win this game. I think Iceland probably are the weakest of the 4 sides in this group, so they had to win this on paper anyway. They had to win this game today. Denmark are an interesting one. I think there's a few players who play for Brentford in Denmark's team. Obviously, they're playing week in, week out in the Championship. A few others as well. There was one player I think's on loan from Juventus somewhere, and he was supposed to be quite a hot prospect a few years ago, but his name escapes me. So they've got the job done now. They've got 3 points on the board. So the pressure's on now, the other 2 teams. Obviously, I'm expecting France to beat Denmark tonight. And yeah, so they've got 3 points on the board. They had to win this game today. Job done there. So I'm hoping that France do beat Denmark tonight, because I think France are the strongest side of this group. And I think Russia would then go into the France game, which is next for them. They will go into that game. If France and Russia win, well, Russia's obviously won, but if France win tonight as well, then I think Russia will go into that France game, and it's a bit of a free shot, really. I don't think we expect them to win, because, as you were saying, James, this France side is absolutely brilliant. But if they could just play their hearts out again, defend really well, and probably even try and eke out a point against France. If they could do that, then that puts them in a decent position going into that final game against Denmark. Because I expect France to win the group, but I certainly think second place is on for Russia in this, and that will be in qualification to the final 8 in the summer. And not just at stake for the players too, but I think also for Mikhail Glaktionov, the under-21s manager, because I think this is really interesting for him as well, because we're expecting a lot of this on the 21 side to progress to the senior squad after these European Championships. So the senior squad is coming after the under 21 Euros as well, depending on whether Russia get to the final phase in the summer. But it's also important for Galaktionov as well, because obviously it does make you wonder, doesn't it? If he gets Russia through to the under 21s quarterfinals minimum, could that mean he pretty much has put himself in pole position whenever that is to take over from Stani as the next coach of Spornaya, the senior team? I think it probably does. So this is a big tournament for him as well. But yeah, tonight's result certainly gives Russia a chance, and it'd be interesting to see how they get on against a side who are as talented and as fancied as this French team.
Yeah, that's an interesting theory. I mean, we have mentioned a few times that the RFU tends to bring players forward in big waves, and this is the most recent one. I wonder if Galaktionov would follow them, because usually they tend to bring these big sets of players through and then like to match them with an experienced coach to kind of help kind of rebalance some of the potential lack of top level experience that this large group may have. David, last word on the under 21s. Now, Richard did mention Galaktionov there. Now, do you think that the coaching levels are good enough at the youth levels in Russia? Because as they are performing very well in the youngers right now, but is that maybe down to just the sheer prodigious individual talent of this current crop, which has got to be the biggest one since maybe 2010 to 12 era?
I think it's a hard one to judge. I think obviously post World Cup, we talk to people, we ask people, and we were hearing that football schools were really in demand. I remember talking to a guy I know who lived in Orenburg, which wasn't even a World Cup city, but post World Cup, their school doubled in size. So there's a bigger demand, and I think going forward, things will improve from grassroots level. You've got all these prestigious football academies. Football seems to be getting more and more popular every year in Russia. It was already a big sport, but I don't know. It feels like there's efforts going on to make it more popular. Not even Premier League level, but at lower levels. FNL is moving onto the TV soon as well in Russia, which it wasn't before. So it appears there's moves. This current crop of players would have gone into football schools. Let's just say they all started in their early teens about 10 years ago for the bulk of them. Obviously, Zakharyan during the World Cup 3 years ago would have only been 14 years old. So these guys, a lot of them will have been pre-World Cup players. So it shows that there's something there. These are from a wide range of academies. A lot of these guys, I remember that we did a tweet on RFN which broke it down, and the biggest selection of players was from Dino's academy, which was 5. But there's like a spread of like at least 10 clubs providing players for the Russian under-21 squad in this tournament, including clubs like Tom Tomsk have provided one player in Daniel Glebov. So it shows that it's not always about coaching and talent and the prestigious academies. I think we'll see a change going forwards for definite, but it's not. It needs to be more driven. I think at the moment the drive is from the demand rather than the drive coming from above, which it should be encouraged as well. There should be encouragement and money coming from higher up, as well as the demand from the kids driving it.
Yeah, that's almost even delving into some good old Russian working class proverbs and literature there, where it's all bottom up and not top down. It's from the people rather than the authorities, which is always a nice thing to do, and it's a nice thing to discuss. But there needs to be more done from the highest level. There's a FIFA Pro investigation that recently came out, and basically their findings were that the infrastructure, the authorities, and coaching were the 3 biggest things holding back Russian football. So it does need to improve, but proof is on the pitch. And right now, the under-21s is a very exciting group of players, and I'm really looking forward to seeing them progress, seeing them play in this tournament, and then inevitably the vast majority of them will make the step up. It's not if, it's when they will do it. And I'm glad you mentioned Tom Tomsk there, David, because we will quickly run through some FNL fixtures. Of course, it may be the international break, but the FNL is a real league. It's no farmers league, and they actually play on during the international break. Now, I'll quickly just cover a certain Yevgeny Pushmanov, who's returned to Spartak 2. He was a very highly rated coach at Spartak for years, and he became the Russia U21s manager, speaking of the under-21s, and he's now went back to Spartak 2, replacing the sacked Piplik. Got off to one of the worst starts possible. They were 3-0 up, was it, David, against Alanya, and drew 3-3. No, 2-0 up against Alanya and drew 3-3 in the end. They got tonked again at the weekend. So it's not looking good for them, but I feel like it's more a symptom of the quality of squad player at that level rather than Bushmanov coming in. He's not going to make much of an impact. He's very much a thinking man's manager. I'm glad that he's back, though, because at one point he was very, very highly rated and kind of just to peter out into nothing, unfortunately, for a little while. But anyway, we've got the title race is hotting up, and it seems like Krylia's going to run away with it, David, this year.
Yeah, they've won every game since the restart. They're now 6 points clear at the top. Having, I think, before the restart, it was pretty tight there between the top two. But they've been absolutely solid, since the restart, and they're now, based on the gap. We've seen a little gap form towards between third and fourth now, and they just need one more win to guarantee a top four spot and a minimum of a playoff. With there only being 6 fixtures left in the season. So yeah, it seems like a matter of a formality at this point. You can't see them dropping 7 points and dropping down into third or fourth at this stage. So yeah, it seems all about the formality that they'll be promoted as one of the top two at this stage, playing really well. Sergeyev scoring again. He's within 3 goals of the 31 goal record, I think, which is by Ruslan Mukhometshin. So he's getting there, and it seems very certain he's going to break that with 28 goals. So yeah, very good season for them, very good restart. Second place, you've got a big tussle now between Orenburg and Nizhny. Nizhny picked up a couple of wins after a shaky restart, and they're the two that are going for second place now. So they're both 6 and 7 points clear of Alanya, who now have jumped over Torpedo in fourth. And then, you got a decent race. Baltica had been fantastic since the restart until this weekend. They'd played 5, won 5 and not conceded. Then they went into this big game against Orenburg. If they'd won it, they'd have been right up there, pushing for the fourth playoff spot. But they lost and now are 5 points adrift of Alanya. So that was a shame because, it would be nice to get Baltica maybe with a chance to come up. But alas, no. Fakel doing really well mid-table. They won again. Andrei Razborov with a brace. He also lobbed the keeper with possibly the highest lob I've ever seen. I think it went about 30 yards in the air, like directly upwards before looping down and over the keeper, which is a very strange goal. But they're fully safe now. They've climbed well out of trouble. You've got Irtish and Akron who are clambering up towards Spartak and Krasnodar, who are both in danger of dropping into the relegation zone. And ultimately, I think we all wouldn't be too disappointed. We'd rather see clubs like Akron, especially, who've got drive and determination to do something in the future with their backing to try and stay up. And then to further down, as we said, Tom Tomsk, they're giving it a go. Had a couple of good results since the turn of the year. But ultimately, the first half of the season's killed them. They're still, with their good results, still 10 points clear of safety. And it seems like they may end up going back down under Alexander Kurzhakov, who's built a really good squad of young players this second half of the season. Some really, really exciting players in there. The one who's highlighted for me is Nikita Krivtsov, midfielder, 18 years old, looks very good, on loan from Torpedo Vladimir or Armavir, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. Never played for Russia in any of the youth setup, but he'll be playing in the FNL for sure next year, at the very least. Very, very exciting player by the look of it.
Torpedo Vladimir, he's on loan from. I just enjoy that in somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I mean, how is Pinyayev getting on at Chatanova this season? I know he's been in and out of the team. Still, obviously, only 16.
He missed a big chunk in the autumn with injury, but he started every game since the restart, and I think he was starting a good few before spring, before the winter break when he came back from his injury. Grabbed a brace of assists last week against someone bad. It must have been Shinnik. Got 2 assists and was also fouled, which got a man sent off. So yeah, 16 years old playing regularly, it would have been good. Obviously they were due to play Maccabi Tel Aviv in the UEFA Youth League, which obviously then was cancelled. And I'm sure he would have been involved in it. So that's a big shame. I don't know how that will work for Chertanova going forwards. Will they get into next year's one? Who knows? It would be a shame if they end up losing out because of this. But yeah, obviously, Chertanova looks set to go down, and maybe that's, we talked about it before, I think it'd be a blessing for them. This group of players is very young in general, mostly 18s and 19s in there. They probably need a year at the PFL to help them develop. A year or 2 down there, maybe they can then have a go at coming back up. They lost their golden generation to Karelia, who, as we can see, have benefited greatly from it. Big blow, obviously losing them, but I think they won't be worried about being relegated. They'll take it on the chin, go down, and rebuild. They're a football school rather than a club, as they always say. So yeah, we'll see how they get on.
And Richard, you've been keeping an eye of late on not Torpedo Vladimir, but Torpedo Moscow's results. They've had in the last week a 3-0 victory in a Moscow derby and a managerial sacking as well.
Yeah, unfortunately for Sergei Nashevich, a 4-1 defeat away to Nizhny Novgorod last weekend was the final straw for Sergei Nashevich. Unfortunately, he was Sergei Nashevich. He was dismissed after the game, and literally within a day, Torpedo had announced a replacement. We saw a 4-man shortlist of candidates who they were looking to hire, but eventually they chose somebody else. They chose Alexander Borodjuk, who famously was Gus Hiddink's assistant with the Russian national team for a little while. I think he's coached at Zenit as well before. He's quite experienced. I think he's in his early 60s now. And yeah, they had an instant impact. They won 3-0 against Chertanova at home, and they're only 3 points off the top 4 again now. I think if Torpedo are going to come up, as David alluded to, there's a bit of a gap now emerged between, I think between Orenburg and Nizhny in 2nd and 3rd, and then 4th. There's a bit of a gap now, so I think automatic promotion's kind of out of reach now for Torpedo. I think if they're going to come up, they're going to probably have to come up through the playoffs. I still think they can get the playoffs. I'm not sure if they can go up this season though. I would like to see them go up. I think even if they can't play next year at the Streltsov, I think the Streltsov, the newly renovated Streltsov Stadium, only opens, I think, in the summer of 2022. But I would like to see them come up because obviously it's a privately run club with a wealthy owner who I certainly think if they go up will certainly spend money. I think they, Roman Avdeyev, their owner, is a very wealthy man. And yeah, I'd like to see them come up, but I think maybe this year they might just miss out. Although, maybe this coaching change could be the impetus to reignite the promotion bid. Interesting to see where Ignashevich goes now. Will he find another FNL club to rebuild his reputation? But yeah, should be interesting developments at Torpedo over the next few weeks, one would think.
He's had a bit of a funny career, Alexander Borodjuk, because he was a very, very talented player. He's a member of the Grigory Fedotov club, and any player who's a member of that club is, for those who don't know, is players who scored more than 100 goals in their career during the Soviet era. But Borodjuk was a very talented attacking midfielder, second striker sort of character, but more so number 10 now, really. And he never played for Torpedo until the very end of his career. I think one of his last seasons as a player, he was at Torpedo. Torpedo Zil, which is like the precursor to current Torpedo after all the financial troubles. But he's only had two senior managerial roles in Russian football aside, and they've both been at Torpedo. He's been assistant of Russia about 12 times. He's been sporting director at Dinamo, manager of Kazakhstan and Kairat Almaty in Kazakhstan. He's the manager of the Russia under-21s, but both of those roles were his only senior roles were Torpedo. And if I remember correctly, last time he was at Torpedo, they got relegated, but it wasn't on him. It was much bigger issues than that. But yeah, I think it's been a very popular appointment with the Torpedo Ultras, and I think that's, to be honest, the reason why they signed Borodyuk. Yes, they were relegated in his last period in charge, but he's very, very popular with them for the way that he held himself off the pitch, for the football that they played on the pitch. They generally accepted that the relegation was not his fault. And it does really seem like the board at Torpedo are trying to pacify the Ultras, because the Ultras were very, very, very much against Ignashevich in the end of his tenure, largely because, for those that don't know, Torpedo's a sister club to Spartak. They're rivals, but friendly rivals. Very much like a Nottingham Forest Notts County sort of thing, as opposed to Nottingham Forest Derby in an English context. So because Ignashevich was a CSKA legend, they never really gave him time of day. Got off to a flyer, so they proved them wrong. So they put up with him, but it was very much a case of putting up with him, despite the fact they were off to a flyer for their first season, had a very good run of form put together for a little bit of the second season. He was never really enamoured to their fans, so it's very much a case of just try and salvage anything they can out of this season, try and get fourth ahead of Alania if they can, and move on from there. I think he's only got a contract until the end of the year, so yeah, hopefully he can turn it around, because Torpedo are in a little bit of a dire strait, and the results up until the win against Chitanova midweek. Richard, any last word on the FNL?
Just one last thing about that as well. That's interesting about a contract to the end of the season, because one of the candidates for the role, if we were led to believe it before Borodyuk was taken on, was apparently Andrei Telalayev. Now he's obviously coaching Akhmat in the RPL at the moment, which I think could be quite interesting, because Akhmat, it's a club where managers don't tend to stay very long. So I guess, they've got Borodyuk in, and if he gets them into the playoffs and gets them promoted, that could be quite good. But yeah, it could be interesting that Torpedo are keeping their hopes open with that, because if Talalayev was suddenly to become available, and they could then have the flexibility, if Borodyuk doesn't make the progress that they are looking for, they could get Talalayev in, and I think that would be a really good appointment, because he did well last year at Himki, and he contributed to the promotion. So that could be quite one to watch, maybe. But yeah, we'll have to see how it goes.
Yeah, and it is kind of paramount that Torpedo do get promoted back into the RPL as soon as possible. As we all know, unfortunately the Edward Streltsov Stadium has been demolished, or is being demolished, and they are moving to a new stadium that needs to be paid for. So for their ownership structure, it's vital that they do get there ASAP. David, any last words for yourself on the FNL?
Yeah. Obviously, I mentioned before about Fekel and Rezborov. Rezborov is on electric form for them. He's scored 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 goals in his last 7 appearances, which is great form. But I also wanted to just mention Dmitry Vorobyev at Orenburg. I wondered how that would go, that move, after he left Volgar in the summer. Not in the summer, in the winter for Orenburg. He'd scored, I think, 10 goals for them, 10 or 11 goals. I wondered how he would do at Orenburg, with them having Famier and Kozlov, who, experienced strikers. Kozlov obviously was once a big goal scorer in the FNL before. I think he had a 20-goal season in the past. And he's done really well. He's done very well since he joined Orenburg. I think he's scored 5 goals since the restart. And he's one of those players who looks like he might be the key to maybe earning in that second place ahead of Nizhny, who are really struggling for goals right now. Their lack of form has coincided with a lack of goals. They brought in Yansan and Kavtaradze in the winter, and between them they've only scored once so far. So just goes to show the worth of having a good striker, and Nizhny's lack of of goals is going to kill them. But Orenburg did a really good job bringing in Vorobiev, and it looks like it's going to pay off for them.
Yeah, it's good to see Vorobiev kind of making a little bit of a comeback, because when he was released from Krasnodar, wasn't it, in 2018? He was released when he was released from Krasnodar. He was before then. He was very much one of the highly rated players. I remember at the time Galietzky giving interviews, and he mentioned the Komlachenkas, Vorobievs as the next step. That was his famous. Yacha, I think, if I remember correctly, it was the famous interview was when he said, "I want a team of 11 Krasnodar academy players in my first team." That went well, but yeah, you mentioned goals. I'll just end on Sergeyev. He's got, obviously, as you said, David, 28 goals this season. That's more than the second and third. That's the same amount as the second and third highest goal scorers in the league combined. And then fourth and fifth after that, joint fourth after that are two other Karelia players, just to show how bloody good Karelia have been this season. Absolutely running away with it. Talking about running away, there has been one person run away, or rather get sacked from CSKA this season, and that was that, as we discussed the rumours last week, since then, CSKA have confirmed the sacking of Viktor Goncharenko and the subsequent appointment of Ivica Olic as head coach. Now, the 41-year-old Olic leaves his role as assistant of the Croatian national team and returns to CSKA 15 years after he left, and was in great promise and promised to the fans before his move to Bayern that he will come back one day. And he has followed through that promise. I mean, he is a club legend at CSKA. There is no less than that. He won from 2003 to 2006. He scored 44 goals in 116 games. He won the league 3 times, 2 Russian Cups, 2 Super Cups, and most importantly, the UEFA Cup under Valery Gatsayev. Former teammates and, of course, fellow UEFA Cup winners Milos Krasic and Elvir Rahamic will also join Olic at the club. Krasic, the former Serbian winger of Fenerbahce and Juve as well, he's going to be a director, and the Bosnian centre midfielder General Rahimic is going to return to a role he previously held as a coach at the club. Now, I think he is Olic's assistant. Now, what are your thoughts on this, David, first, on both decisions, because you missed last week's podcast? Are they right to sack Goncharenko, and is Olic a good replacement?
Well, they certainly gave him a long time to turn things around, Goncharenko. It's been not just this season, but it was shaky last season, as we know. Ultimately, Russia domestically isn't as competitive as it could be, and he's been able to qualify for Europe on both occasions. They're going to qualify for Europe this season. But that's not because Goncharenko's done a good job. It's because the competition haven't done a good job. But in Europe, we've seen him, struggle. But we have to give credit. Goncharenko came in. I'm pretty sure he did win the league with them, maybe once. But regardless of that, he had 2 good runs in Europe to come to the quarterfinals of the Europa League, where they eventually lost to Arsenal. Then they had that Champions League run where they beat Real Madrid home and away and still came last in the group somehow. The 2 victories against Real Madrid will go down in CSKA history. So he did a lot of good for the club, Goncharenko, and he started a lot of young players' careers. That's one of the things that Goncharenko's been praised for. Is we talk about guys like Slitsky bringing through lots of young talent. Goncharenko's done a good job too with guys like Obliakov, Diveyev. Half the current CSKA crop are very young players out there. But we've seen them really struggle this year with goals, especially. They create so many chances, but they don't score. And the defense has not been the way it should have been since Rodrigo Becao left. That season where they had Becao in there, the defense was rock solid. And they've struggled since in there, despite having players like Diveyev and Diveyev being basically the only good player in there. Magnusson does a good job at times. Karpov and Vasin are, less said the better, let's just say. So there are problems there, and they had money in the summer and they didn't invest it probably the best way they could have. Gaich, we won't even mention Gaich. Aduke's, the jury's still out on Aduke, let's just say as well. That was a lot of outlay that went there on those 2 players. Bruno Fuchs, we're yet to judge him. It was a decent fee. He's come in with a lot promise, but just been out with injury. So we yet to see that, and maybe that if he wasn't injured, maybe it would have been a great thing for CSKA to help them to be better. But yeah, the investment, which, as I'm pretty sure we've heard, Gaich was pushed by Goncharenko, rather than, because we were all thinking, was it just really bad, like a lack of scouting? But it seems as if it was actually something they'd done, and it's a baffling call because obviously they just didn't utilize him in a good way at all, and he didn't seem to fit their style at all. So some strange decisions from Goncharenko in the last couple of years. They have had their struggles, and for 2 years to go through struggles, it's a long time for a club. So ultimately, it was probably time to make a change, and we'll see how Olic gets on. Not a lot of experience, but took Croatia to the World Cup final as the assistant that year. Helped, was a pivotal part in that. Speaks Russian, has a good relationship with the club. Croatian along with Vlasic, which we're all expecting Vlasic to move. But we'll see. We give every manager a chance whenever they start somewhere, see how they get on. But I think they do need a change, and change has come.
Yeah, I think they do need a change. Goncharenko didn't with CSKA, nearly did. I think it was in his second season. They finished second, 2 points behind Loco when they won the league for the first time in forever. For the 4 league results are, as things stand, second, fourth, and fourth. So domestically, they have obviously stepped backwards. The quality of players isn't as good as when he took over, but he's manager. Is that up to him? Richard, do you have anything to add from last week on your thoughts on Goncharenko and Olic? And I have actually seen a couple of suggestions online from followers of RFN and some Russian journalists that potentially Ivica Olic is being brought in to try and get the best out of Nikola Vlasic, one said. What the best is, I don't know, because he already is possibly at his best in Russia right now. But do you think that's the case, maybe? Or are they trying to get the best out of Vlasic, or maybe trying to persuade him to stay?
Yeah, I can see that angle of approach towards it. Obviously, you hire a compatriot and your star player happens to be of that nationality as well. I can see that approach to it. But then, on the other hand, we've seen Vlasic linked with AC Milan in the Russian press recently. And let's face it, if Milan suddenly slap a €30 million bid for Vlasic in this summer, then it doesn't matter whether Olic is the coach or not. I really doubt he'll be at CSKA next season because he's not going to turn down the chance to play for one of the most prestigious clubs in European football. If AC Milan come calling, he's going to go. It's so I could see where those reports were coming from, but at the same time, I think we probably know that if we're getting just to flip clubs, we all kind of have a feeling Asmoon's going to go in the summer, and you kind of get the impression Vlasic will probably go as well. I think he's going to want to have a big Euros this summer in the European Championships for Croatia this summer, and we all know he's arguably the best player in the league. We all know that it's only a matter of time before he goes. So I could see where those reports were coming from, but I think it's inevitable that Vlasic will be moving on soon. CSKA are going to get a big transfer fee for him, so be interested to see what Olic can do with that. I mean, I've been having more of a think about this since last week, and I still think it's a risk, of course, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the one thing I will say about this move is that, obviously we've seen what's happened at Torpedo with Ignashevich, so thank goodness CSKA have not gone down that route or gone down the route of putting the Berezutskis in charge. Otherwise, what was the point in sacking Goncharenko? If it was a choice between keeping Goncharenko or putting the Berezutskis in charge, I'd rather have kept Goncharenko because obviously he's a lot more experienced than they are in coaching terms. I guess one thing you could say about this move is that with CSKA doing it now, it does give Olic a 7-game period from now to the end of the season to assess the squad. If they'd have changed manager, if they'd have moved Goncharenko on in the summer and brought in someone then they're only having practice games and they're then having to reevaluate the squad, in the summer break, and then before you know it, competitive games are on you. CSKA might only finish 4th this season, so they'd be straight into the Conference League early doors qualification rounds where they cannot afford to fail. They have to have a good season in Europe next season. So at least with Olic coming in now, it allows them time to prepare. He's got 7 competitive games plus potentially 3 in the Russian Cup. So there is that to it. Like David said, he speaks Russian, so that's an advantage as well. We do go on about, we would like to see more foreign coaches come to Russia, but obviously the language is an adaptation thing which they have to deal with at the beginning, and it's not always easy. Olic has played in Russia for 4 years before and crucially speaks the language, so that's an even bigger bonus. I still think it's a gamble, but we'll have to wait and see. At least he's going to have some time to get his feet under the table, which is good. And it's a clean start for a lot of players. Like we got a message on our Twitter, I think from an Icelandic fan about wondering what happened to Arno Sigurdsson. And, he had dropped out of favour recently under Goncharenko, but now that there's a new manager in charge, it's a fresh start. Who knows? Emil Bohinen, be interesting to see what happens with him, what position or role Olic has for him. Will the formation change? It's going to be intriguing at CSKA. I still think it's a gamble to appoint Olic, but it'll be interesting and entertaining for the rest of the season. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think this is when I was growing up, when I was younger. I was 10 to 13 during the time of the Olic's period at CSKA and when they won the cup, the UEFA Cup. And I kind of remember this in my childhood, and I look back on this with a little bit of rose-tinted spectacles, quite happy about these 3 being back together. There's a really heartwarming photo of Krasic, Olic, and Rahimic as the 3 Balkan players in the squad at the time, celebrating the UEFA Cup together. It's a really nice story. I hope it goes well for CSKA and for Olic, because if it does, the fans would just be absolutely delighted. But like I said last week, I always worry about these legendary managers coming into that one club because the pressure's so high, the passion is high. It's sometimes difficult to do what is necessary to detach yourself from the situation. I hope it goes well, because when it does, it really does get a club flying. So all the best to them. And I do think, to be quite honest, that they held on to Goncharenko so long. It was so obvious that how far they had regressed from the team that he had uplifted to defeat Real Madrid twice in some brilliant results in that quarter-final run in the Europa League themselves. So it's quite unfortunate. Richard, any last words on Olic before we finish up the pod?
Yeah, just to say on Goncharenko, I do say that I do hope we see him in Russian football again. There were some good things, like David said. I was also very impressed at the way, especially Obyakov and De Gea. I think there's 2 players there that he's really brought on over the last couple of years, and they've definitely been big success stories. And they're 2 players who I think can play abroad in the future in a Big 5 European league. So that was good to see. Zayutdinov was a good signing, and admittedly, whilst I thought it was with Slutsky's team, he did do a very good job in 2017-18 in Europe. Some of those performances were excellent, particularly Lyon away. And then they gave Arsenal a good run for the money in Moscow as well in the second leg of that quarter-final. And the 2 results against Real Madrid. It was the last 2 years, the last 2 years dented it a little bit, which was a bit of a shame. But I certainly hope Goncharenko has a break now, comes back. And, I still think he could get a mid-table job in the RPL, if Fedotov was to leave. If Fedotov leaves Sochi or someone like Karpin leave Rostov, there's 2 potential opportunities for him there. So maybe even the Russian national team job in the future, who knows? I still think he shouldn't be lost to Russian football. I do agree, it got a bit stale at the end, but hopefully he'll come back fresher. And he's still very young, only 45, so I still think there's some mileage there, just a few things he needs to improve.
Yeah, talented manager. His time at Ufa proved just how talented that he is, and he will, if he does get another job in the RPL, he will walk into it, and I think he probably would be a success. I think he needs to be more pragmatic. He showed some good pragmatism when he was at Ufa. He wasn't CSKA was far too often stuck to this one philosophy, this one style, and there wasn't really much pragmatism away from that. I don't know if his signing of Gaich was an aim to try and move on from that, but it didn't work out whatsoever. And that one signing of Gaich probably is the catalyst for the decision that's been made, to be quite honest, with Goncharenko. But he is a very good coach, and I think one of the things that he needs, and Gaich again highlights it, is he needs a solid structure around recruitment and transfers around him. He needs to be a head coach. He was a head coach at CSKA, but like you both mentioned earlier, he was the one who really pushed for Gaich. And when he was at Ufa, it's as the Spartak story has told us, Gazizov has all control, and all control stops with Gazizov. The head coach is merely the trainer. So Goncharenko, there's definitely a future for him in the game. You just need to break, and I think this really had... The writing had been on the wall since he took that break and go back to Belarus with the angina problem, the high blood pressure. You could just see that it was really getting to him, and it was an inevitability that him and Cisco would part ways sooner rather than later. And on that bombshell, this is just about the end of the RFN podcast this week. On Saturday, Russia hosts Slovenia in Sochi, and then on Wednesday, they travel to Slovakia for the first away game of this qualifying campaign. The FNL continues as usual, with one of the standout games, a battle at the bottom of the table, as Chertonova host Akron, who are still actually unbeaten since the return to action in late February. David, where can everyone find yourself online?
You can follow me on Twitter at RFN_David.
And Richard?
You can find me on Twitter at RichDPike89, at RichDPike89.
This has been the RFN Podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.